We are back for the Thousand Worlds Book Club, and we're talking about the Stone City. I am joined by the cat's paw assassin who tried to kill Bran back in a Game of Thrones.
Hello, everyone.
The Stone City was originally published in 1977, almost a decade before the last story we read, The Glass Flower. It was published around the same time as Bitterblooms and Dying of the Light, and we get a few passing references to both stories. Our main character, Holt, is from the planet Ymir, which is mentioned in Bitterblooms. In fact, Bitterblooms the flower is native to Ymir. It's again worth noting that the planet Ymir and the world from Bitterblooms both have uneven seasons, just like Westeros. Holt also idolizes Cain, an old man from Emerald in the Fringe, who attended the festival on Warlorn in his youth. I suppose that puts this story about 200 years after Dying of the Light, which means it's about 800 years after the Interregnum, about 50 years after the Glass Flower, and about 100 years before Tough Voyaging. It also should be noted that House Uller of Hellholt, that is, Alaria Sand's house, is a tribute to Holt and the Ullish civilization that are referenced in this story. So the Stone City is our only Thousand Worlds story to take place outside the Man Realm, on the planet Greyrest, which is pretty far in towards the galactic core. When I first tried to map the Thousand Worlds, I made the mistake of thinking that Greyrest was in either Findi or Damoosh space, and this beautiful map by Caffeine is based on that mistake. In fact, past Findi and Damoosh space, there's the space of the vanished Nor-Talush, then past them are the reaches of Kresh, then the squid-faced Gethsoids of Oth, and then we get to the Sidrins and the Danlai among the Ullish stars. This is where Greyrest is. Now, we've actually heard about the Damoosh, the Nor-Talush, and the Gethsoids of Oth in other stories like Night Flyers and Seven Times Never Kill Man. These furthest races are all new and only appear in this story. Anyway, I do think it's interesting that the Thousand Worlds universe has both a reach and a veil. So our story begins with Holt trapped on Greyrest, a cross-world ruled by a fox-like race called the Danlai. Before the Danlai, Greyrest was ruled by the Ullish race, the Ul-Menelaith, who worshipped the race that came before them, the Ul-Nyalaith. They are the ones that built the Stone City. Neither the Danlai nor the Ul-Menelaith know what the Stone City is really for, so it lies vacant. Interestingly, once again our author has a setting of technological regression and the decay of civilization. This has been a pretty overwhelming theme in most of our author's work, whether it be the regressed societies of Bitterblooms and In the House of the Worm, or the old technologies of Tough Voyaging, or the decayed tower in This Tower of Ashes, or the regressed Janeshee from And Seven Times Never Kill Man, or the decaying festival city of Dying of the Light, or, Westeros. Anyway, Holt has been on Greyrest for a year trying to get passage off, but the Danlai are insanely bureaucratic. Every day Holt tries to get passage off-world, and every day he is denied by the Foxmen. Holt's crewmate MacDonald had lost his temper with the Danlai and had been killed, so Holt has been very careful to play the game of bureaucracy. Now the story is also interspliced with flashbacks to Holt's life. We find out that Holt grew up on Ymir stargazing and always dreamed of traveling. He eventually leaves Ymir for Finnegan and along the way meets Cain, a man who has lived a very full life and has traveled almost the entire Man Realm. Cain, as well as the ancient explorers Tomo and Walberg, become Holt's inspiration. Cain, by the way, also tells us a bit about the Harangan mines and says that they're staying underground awaiting their return. This, of course, reminds me of the Children of the Forest. Holt eventually decides to go to the center of the galaxy after visiting a Damoosh wisdom pool. The Damoosh, much like the Children of the Forest or the Undying of Qarth, have their consciousness transferred into a hive-minded state upon death. However, even these Damoosh wisdom pools don't know what's at the center of the galaxy, so Holt decides to go in and find out. Holt's life on Greyrest, though, is anything but adventurous. The Danlai run the planet and its space field, and there is a population of shipless aliens who are trapped on Greyrest much like Holt. When not dealing with Danlai bureaucracy, Holt methodically robs the homes of nocturnal Sidrins to get food cards. We eventually find out what became of the rest of Holt's crew. Ian MacDonald was killed trying to shoot his way into the space field. The captain, Carlos Villarreal, Susie Bennett, Det, Lana, and Magi all got lost in the Stone City. A woman named Iray became super religious and killed herself in a religious ceremony, and another person named Davy Tillman essentially killed himself by selling himself as a Kresh egg host. Which brings us to Tacker Ray and Holt's ex-lover Elena. They have both fallen into drug use and hopelessness. They live as sex workers to survive and seem to be controlled by a drug dealer called the Shed Boss. The Shed Boss can't speak, but for some reason he knows what people want. I suppose he might be a guessoid of Oth, but I'm really not sure. Holt lives with the final crew member, Jeff Sunderland. Perhaps House Sunderly is named after him? Sunderland is a would-be academic. He spends his days mapping the Stone City in hopes that the Dan Lai will pay him for his research. Holt and his burglary keep Sunderland alive. Sunderland's job, though, is daunting. The Stone City itself is massive and complex. Its streets have no logic, and it varies massively from place to place. We have obsidian towers, then pyramids, then gray plains. The variety reminds me a bit of the different cities on Warlorn, which reminds me of the different cities of Essos. It's likely that the Stone City's variance is due to the Ulnialaith bringing in different styles from all over the galaxy. Holt, though, is extremely pessimistic that Sunderland's research will amount to anything, as the city is huge and the Dan Lai are difficult. Eventually, through flashback, we discover how Holt ended up stranded on Greyrest. He finds a crew that has decided that standard faster-than-light ship drive is too slow, and they are about to try out a new Dan Lai jump gun. They're really Ulmenalaith jump guns, but the Dan Lai are using them. The technology seems to rely on a telepathic collective consciousness bending space and time. It's very George R.R. Martin. Anyway, the big problem is, as the ship heads inward towards the center of the galaxy, the laws of nature and the rules to the universe seem to change. Once at Greyrest, after a painful use of the jump gun that put Holt in a 3-month coma, none of their instruments work. And so the action comes at about 3/4 of the way through our story. Holt goes to the Dan Lai offices at the spaceport and finds a room empty. He starts rummaging through the desks, only to be caught by a Dan Lai. He is then weirdly, finally offered a ship by them. Holt then goes through all of the maddening bureaucratic loops, only to discover at the end that he needs his captain's signature. The captain, of course, went missing in the Stone City. Holt cracks and then kills the Foxman. Holt is now a fugitive, and so he runs into the city of the Shipless to get supplies. He weirdly buys his dead crewman's laser rifle from some merchants, and he buys a light helmet that reminds me of the one from In the House of the Worm. He grabs 2 weeks of food from home and then heads into the tunnels underneath the Stone City to hide. His hope is to hide for 2 weeks and then maybe come back and get food from Sunderland. But then the story gets really, really weird. After descending many stairs in the Stone City, he finds himself in a tower overlooking the city where Dan Lai are hunting and torturing a Sidran. He tries to shoot the Dan Lai, but finds himself back in the tunnels. He then begins to wander, and it's as if Holt is lost in the House of the Undying, looking through doors. He sees his old house on Ymir, then Sunderland begging Holt to come back, and then the Shed Boss appears to be Holt's guide. He sees the Dan Lai and learns their history, essentially. The jump guns have been slowly driving them insane and making them more feral. He wanders and sees the ghosts of other aliens wandering, including a man in uniform and a Dan Lai. Later, that same Foxman has grown old. Many of the alien ghosts enter different doors and enter different worlds. He sees a Harangan world in desolation, and then sees I Emerald and thinks about entering. He thinks about going back for Sunderland, Tacker Ray, and Elena, but then he decides he needs to see a few places first. Old Earth and Prometheus. Our story ends way in the future with the universe now old, but Holt still wanders the Stone City exploring. So Catspaw Assassin, what are your thoughts on the Stone City?
So George R.R. Martin really hates rich people, doesn't he?
Yeah, the Stone City seems to be very much about our economic system and our author's early life, or at least his views back then when he wrote this story. George R.R. Martin grew up fairly poor in a shitty part of New Jersey called Bayonne. That area of New Jersey, especially when our author lived there, was pretty industrial and rather depressing. It's a whole lot of shipyards, warehouses, and polluted water. His father was a longshoreman, and his family lived in public housing. From this story and our next one, Nobody Leaves New Pittsburg, we can get some idea about how George feels about home.
You know, I grew up in a slum. It seems that most people leave, or those that stay are people with broken dreams that have little economic opportunity. Sometimes they fall into drugs or crime.
You mean like you did?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Greyrest is, of course, a thinly veiled Bayonne, New Jersey. It's a shipyard surrounded by have-nots. The have-nots have little opportunity to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and all escape runs through the system, but the system clearly isn't built for the have-nots. And so the have-nots scrape by and go nowhere. Even Holt, with all his credentials and skills, cannot escape. Keep in mind, back when George R.R. Martin wrote this story, he was Holt. He had an undergraduate and master's degree in journalism from Northwestern and was struggling and failing to make it as either a journalist or a writer. He was organizing chess tournaments for a living and had only recently gotten a job as an instructor at Clark College.
Our author's criticism of the world's economic system and the haves is pretty brutal. The Dan Lai are currently in control and spend all of their time abusing the Shipless, and they don't allow any of the Shipless off-world. But here's the kicker. The Dan Lai didn't even build the system. They inherited it from greater beings that came before them. And the system has done nothing but corrupt the Dan Lai and make them ever more cruel. Meanwhile, the Shipless are lost and forced to prey on each other. George R. R. Martin has a serious problem with the haves.
Not that Holt isn't also frustrated with the Shipless. His friends have left, found God, died, fallen into drugs, or have become obsessed with ridiculous pipe dreams. They are painful constant reminders of failure and the impossibility of rising in the system. Holt fears becoming them. So while our author is mainly criticizing the haves, there is some criticism of the have-nots. In fact, I do wonder how much of our author is in Holt and how much is in Sunderland. Sunderland's pipe dream of mapping the Stone City and making money off it seems almost as crazy as George R. R. Martin trying to make it as a sci-fi writer. Holt picks apart Sunderland's overly ambitious plans, warning that it'll take many years and that success is highly unlikely. So Grey Rest is a pretty clear metaphor for the rigged system and the hopelessness one feels when trapped somewhere, but there is a question to what the Stone City represents. Yes, literally in the story, the Stone City seems to be a nexus of space and time used for transportation. But what is it figuratively?
Well, the shed boss appears in the middle of it. Could it be some sort of drug?
Well, I definitely think it's a vice of some sort. Holt clearly wants to travel forever and ever, so much that he does it for thousands, if not millions of years at the end. However, what Holt is doing is not quite traveling. He never really escapes Grey Rest. Holt looks in each door, but he never really goes anywhere. While our author probably dreamed of traveling watching all of those ships come in and out of Bayonne, he was never really a huge traveler, not like Holt. So I think that the Stone City represents something else, something like a drug in that it simulates escape, but is not actually escape. Although it sounds cheesy, I think that the Stone City likely represents reading for our author. Reading, like the Stone City, is more about looking into new places rather than actually going there.
Now I feel kind of bad about burning the Winterfell library. But if this story is really about reading, it reminds me of Sam and his endless love of books. Wouldn't he get lost for hours reading?
He would, and in interviews, George R. R. Martin says that Sam is the character most like himself. So this story about a man stranded on a crappy planet and then finding technology for infinite travel is really about George R. R. Martin stuck in Bayonne, New Jersey, escaping the pain through books. And that's all for the Stone City. I'd like to thank the Cat Spa. Next time we'll get more into New Jersey and The Walking Dead in Nobody Leaves New Pittsburg, the first story in the Corpse Handler trilogy. The link for the story is below. See you next time.